Keep your head up, keep your head up, keep your head up. We'll make it through. We'll make it through. Keep your head up, don't let it drop. We'll make it through. And we'll make it through.
Hello, viewing audience. Welcome to Heads Up, a show about mental health and wellness. I'm retired school counselor Sue Mullen, and with me is my co-host, licensed family and mental health counselor Diane Vaccarello. Hello, Diane Vaccarello.
Hi, Sue. So good to see you in just a short week.
Good to see you as well. How was your week?
Fantastic. We got through the rain, Halloween, all of that. So,
busy
good
time.
times.
Busy time at the farm.
Exactly.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, listen, you and I had a conversation after last week's episode about the fact that this show is billed as being about mental health and wellness.
Right.
And that we spend a tremendous amount of time talking about mental health, and we have hardly used the word wellness in the bunch of episodes that we've produced to this point. So this week I am suggesting that we go to that wellness aspect of Heads Up. And so I'm going to, I don't know, maybe quiz you a little bit, surprise you a tad.
I like surprises.
I know you do, and I like keeping you on your toes.
Yeah.
So you know that I do the research before we jump on camera. And this week I went to the National Wellness Institute, which is in Stevens Point, Wisconsin.
All right.
And I started to educate myself and to quiz myself on what I felt I knew about wellness. So let me read something to you.
Great.
The definition of wellness, long used by the National Wellness Institute. Wellness is an active process through which people become aware of and make choices toward a more successful existence. It's consistent with these tenets: that wellness is a conscious, self-directed, and evolving process of achieving full potential, that wellness is multidimensional and holistic, encompassing lifestyle, mental and spiritual well-being, and the environment, and that wellness is positive and affirming. I think you would probably agree with all of those statements.
I love that definition.
Well, I wonder if our viewing audience would say, what did she just say?
There was a lot in there.
Yeah, there was a lot in there.
Yeah.
So, Billy, if you can throw up the graphic that we are giving our audience this week. Most specifically, what I would like to do, Diane, is talk about the 6 dimensions of wellness. And those 6 dimensions of wellness, with a little tweaking by me, are emotional, environmental/occupational, intellectual, physical, social, and spiritual, according to the Wellness Institute.
Right.
So your task this week is to start our conversation on how those 6 things stand out from one another and how they, when integrated, allow us to have a balanced life. And the challenge in today's game show is that I don't want you to talk about the emotional component until the very end.
I will take this challenge. I will say that that's going to be different for me to not talk about the emotional part, but I think it's a really important challenge probably that we should all give ourselves in really taking a look at how complex but well-rounded a human needs to be in order to address, all the points that affect us. So I will do my best not to say the E word.
Okay.
And we'll focus on other than environmental, and we'll focus on these other layers.
All right, now I'll put a disclaimer out there for the audience, and that is that I know that you know that I agree that emotional well-being is sort of an undercurrent in our life.
Of course.
So I will buy you a little room to sort of wiggle things in there if you need to.
Excellent.
What puzzle piece would you like to talk about first?
I think I'd like to talk about the occupational
Okay.
component.
All right, well, that is right at the top of my list as well.
Excellent.
So again, let me review something with you from the National Institute. The environmental occupational dimension encompasses a healthy relationship with the earth and its resources and a healthy relationship with your personal surroundings. It means being intentional about, and then it goes on about talking about protecting yourself from environmental hazards, caring for and organizing your personal and professional spaces so that you are free from unnecessary stress. That was very interesting to me. And conserving resources and leading a lifestyle that's respectful of your immediate surroundings, the community you live in, and the planet. We could probably spend a week talking about all of these things. So
sure.
On your mark, get set, go.
Well, first of all, thanks for doing this research
You're
and
welcome.
for providing some handouts. I really love having sort of a fresh take on, just your insight in terms of like what we should focus on, and then my ability to just sort of like pull out what I see and translate from people I work with on a regular basis.
Right.
And I will definitely say that environment plays a really big role, and COVID is one of those things that kind of challenged people's environment a little bit. People had to shift from where they were into a new space and make that space something that would work for them. I think it obviously encompasses our home environment, our workplace environment, but our community environment as well, and the world we live in. One of the things that stood out in that definition was a person's ability to make choices, that's really key to wellness. And I think that that's the case in this way as well, all the way from young sort of like children, adolescents growing into teenagers, having some say in sort of what their environment looks like in their room.
Yep.
It's a part of a person's identity. I really like the idea of conserving. When we talk about reduce, reuse, recycle, that's part of the environmental piece, but conserving a person's stress, keeping it from getting there in the first place.
Right.
But our surroundings are important. How we work, we want to be able to have a space that allows us to just do our jobs, right?
Let me stop you for a second. So what you're doing is interchangeably using the word environment, not only to mean things like respect for clean water and energy and outdoor spaces,
Right.
but also environment as the space that we're in at any given moment during our day, the environment of home, the environment of work, the environment of play.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
all right.
And so when we then move into the occupational piece with regard to a person's work environment, even schools, right? Or, kids' work is their school oftentimes in learning. Our ability to do our jobs, whatever that job is, we have to have a certain amount of like basic needs being met. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which we've talked about before, you have to be able to have access to essential kinds of things like clean water or whatever the case may be.
Right.
And so all of these things integrate into one another, but mental health wise, and I won't say the E word, but ultimately we really have to understand that certain things in our environment and even in our jobs can detract from our ability to focus on what it is that we deliberately want in our lives, how we deliberately want to be, and our ability to be very conscious while we're doing it. It can be a very big distraction, and consciousness, deliberateness is really important.
And some of those things we have control over and choices about.
Right.
Others, maybe not so much.
Sure, yeah.
I mean, if you get the office that is next to the ice maker, then you have to adapt at a certain level, right? To
Right.
the fact that you're constantly going to have that background noise.
Sure. A window office, no window office, whatever the case may be. I think it's one of those things where we have to be aware of how much of a fit our space is for us. So there are certain things we can't control, of course, but other things that we can. And so really focusing in on the parts that we can control, and again, the occupational part of it, choosing a job that is suitable for what our individual needs are. It's a customized thing that we need to really be selective with. So some people might be more bothered by certain sensory things.
Yep.
And so they wouldn't want to choose a job that's really challenging those areas, right? We want to, again, keep our stress levels down, so making a match that fits. Other people may not have that may not register for them, that's something that detracts.
It's interesting. I'm thinking about two things from my life as a school employee. One is how classroom teachers have to be receptive to how much noise they're making and how much noise they can manage from the rooms on either side of them.
Oh, right.
And I'm also thinking about how we talk to kids about whether or not, as they're thinking about becoming occupationally employed adults, do you want to work with data, people, things,
sounds?
And that's, I think that's what you're talking about,
Exactly.
is making choices suited to you.
Exactly, customized, and really, but that requires a person really understanding what irritates or agitates and what soothes and what comforts. It's really about looking inward and getting to know ourselves really, really well enough to understand what degree these things impact us.
Right, because light and sound may affect me differently than you.
Exactly.
Let me read something to you. It is better to choose a career which is consistent with our personal values, interests, and beliefs than to select one that is unrewarding to us. True or false?
I totally agree with that. I'm oftentimes working with early adults, teens heading off to college, and it's an overwhelming process for them to think about what kind of career do I want to pick. I think it's really important that we have some time in life to explore. It may not even be college, could be a trade, could be something entirely different, going into a business sector, whatever it is, really understanding what's important to that person, what their values are. As we're early adult years, even into our 20s, we're trying to really understand what our values are. Sometimes we know certain things early on. We have a family that sort of has a culture that's been created.
Right.
And as we move on in our years, we're able to develop, take and leave certain parts of that.
Right.
If we're not introspective, if we're not really paying attention to those things, it's really difficult. It's sort of like throwing a dart and just, where is it landing? But if we can really grow into spaces where we're exposed to things more, and we understand, oh, that really connects with my inner self. I'm feeling strong about that.
Right.
If we're in alignment with that, I think we just have much more sense of purpose that doesn't expire, really quickly. It sort of grows.
I'm thinking about the difference between a job and a career, by definition, and also that we work throughout a lifespan. We work for different reasons. I mean, I clearly remember telling my own 16-year-old to basically, get off his high horse. He was not the boss. He didn't need to agree with what was going on or whatever, because he was a teen employee.
And the job is to learn how to listen to people, follow directions,
and to take orders from somebody who's in a position of authority. I certainly know plenty of people who are committed to what they do and find tremendous purpose in their jobs. I also know people that hate getting up every morning and going to work.
And yet, that job may serve a purpose for them, to your point, whether it's a paycheck that allows them to do things they want to do in life, whether it's flexibility to afford them other roles in their life, whatever it is, as long as that is what's important to a person, what drives them, what's interesting to them, and serves the purpose getting through a certain stage in life, then we can like really feel good about it.
I've been curious to watch as I've aged myself, because I chose to spend my most productive career years working in a field where I knew that in and of itself it was not going to make me wealthy.
Yeah.
But I've also seen people go into jobs because of the paycheck.
Yes.
And I don't know that that has always been the panacea that people thought it was going to be.
Exactly. I think it really has to be tied and grounded to what are you doing that for, right? What do you, and that's where when I'm working with someone, I'm also really asking them questions like, okay, so you have that. Now, what do you want to do with that? How does it bring you joy? How does it, you know, add to fulfillment in your life?
Yep.
Does it actually cause problems in your life, right? So we can't just assume that, you know, having a big paycheck doesn't have drawbacks that are actually creating distress for someone.
How about the stress?
Exactly. Of maintaining it, of, you know, never sort of falling back from that. There's lots of layers.
What do you do when what you want and what you're required to do you can't have? And I'm thinking about somebody who wants to have a family with 4 or more children. And that not only requires a lot of financial resources, but it also requires a lot of presence to be driving to and from. And what do you do when what your heart desires you can't always manage with the career that you've chosen? Do you run into that?
I do. There's this organizational sort of, and not everything can be this rational, I'm aware, nor should it, but I do think it's important for people to rank order sort of what they care about the most, what's most important to them. And we can't have everything at a 10.
Right.
You know, we have to decide where we're putting things, and we do have to make distinctive differences, even if it's like a 9.8, 9.7 kind of difference. So I think there's that, and then we focus on what parts we can control and what parts we can't. And I think the people who focus on the things that are most important to them, they really have organize that, and that can change over the course of time, of course. It's not something that's like a snapshot in time or permanent, but I do think that if they focus on the things that are most important and what they can control, that is where the focus needs to remain, because the other things, if you give it energy, there's no, you're not getting anything in return for that. It's just lost energy in a sense. Of course, you know, as you're processing and deciding what do I like, what do I not like, that's a stage where you just let yourself explore and experiment and things like that. But when it comes down to it, it really is important to distinguish what we have control over and what we don't, and what's most important.
Do you ever see people, and I'm mindful of the fact that I don't want you to share identifying stories or characteristics, but do you see people who in the job environment, we're talking a lot about choices and making good decisions or whatever, do you see people that are the problem?
The problem in terms of whatever the scenario is.
Like the office problem.
There you go, here you are.
Like, what do you do if the person who is working with you, or what do you do when you're in an office and you know who the gossip is, or you know who the person is that takes the 2-hour lunch break, or how do you manage those kinds of things?
Yeah, well, if that is the person and I'm working with them, it really is having encouraging sort of a mindset for stepping back and saying, what am I doing that's working? What am I doing that maybe is not working? Really allowing ourselves again to be reflective and take feedback, have open-mindedness so that we can grow and learn and shift. You know, there are certain behaviors I feel like that serve a purpose for a person, or they wouldn't be doing them. And so it's also tying this into what is the kickback, what are they getting from that behavior, that way of being, and can it be traded in for something else that still serves a purpose but is not so annoying or not so, right?
Right.
not really affecting the social aspect, which is one of the other layers of these, 6 factors.
Yeah, I'm always somewhat amused, because we see things in conferences and workshops, staff development things, whatever, right? Everybody's always talking about what do you do to work with difficult people?
Sure.
But I just wonder, does anybody ever start an exploration thinking, wow, I think I'm the difficult person?
Usually doesn't start out that way, but I will say there are people who will sort of come in and say, I think that I'm annoying people.
Because they are reading their environment.
Exactly.
And see disapproval or...
And I think the big thing is when people can step back and recognize patterns. That's when they may not notice in the beginning, but 2 or 3 or 4 points on the line, and they're like, this is a different environment, different work setting, whatever the case may be, but the same patterns are happening, and I'm the common denominator of that.
Right. That's got to be a very powerful moment.
It's an exciting moment for me, because it's where that openness to saying, and vulnerable, right? They're being vulnerable enough to say, I see there's a problem with this, what can I do? I mean, what more can you ask for in those moments?
Right.
Change can take place. It's going to be hard, but the person's on board and they're aware.
At the center of occupational wellness is the premise that occupational development is related to one's attitude about one's work.
Yeah, I think this ties into probably all of them. A person's attitude really is everything in so many ways. So the attitude towards others, attitude towards oneself, attitude towards their company or where they work. And if you think about it, again, that's something we have control over.
Right.
And so it's important because it affects pretty much everything. It's like when you make a decision to enter into a meeting with someone or whatever, it's checking the attitude and bringing to that space a fresh take on that space and not just letting everything roll over into it. The shadows that come in and, do their thing. But I think it's, attitude is good around, I'll say mental health and relationships. Who wants to be around someone who has a negative, pessimistic outlook on everything?
Right.
Pessimism can be protective for people, but it's no fun.
It's interesting because I am finding in my own adult development, now that I own a Medicare card.
Yes.
I'm finding that I'm having discussions with people in my age bracket about what they can do, and I'll say occupationally because I don't necessarily think that you need to get a paycheck in order to be purposeful in an occupational way.
Absolutely true.
But a lot of people get lost when they retire because they don't know what to do if they don't have that job to go to.
Right.
And I think that, comes back to that idea of a sense of purpose. People don't know how to do it. They don't know how to start. This is a whole new area that I'm sort of dipping my toe into.
Right. So we just went the whole lifespan in some ways around how to start, how to end, how to transition. All of these things, as we're going through different stages of life, we have to kind of reevaluate and say what is it that's important to me now? What is it that my needs are? And that purpose piece of it ties into even other aspects like the spirituality around a person's sense of purpose and what their sort of like role is, and that feeds back into even self-esteem, self-worth, attitude.
We're going to spend a whole segment talking about spirituality.
Yeah. And when I hear you even say the word spirituality and I'm talking about it, I'm reminded of Representative Dave Danielson, who used to come to our meetings in the community, and we would talk about things like substance misuse and co-occurring mental health and all sorts of challenges. And he would always raise the question and just ask and say, what about spirituality? And it's something that I don't think people necessarily ask, what about that? It's not really talked about a whole lot necessarily as it ties into into mental wellness, but I think it ties into all of these layers tie into one another.
Right.
But that idea of bigger purpose.
Yeah,
yes,
meaningfulness.
Exactly.
Sort of the idea that there is something larger than you are.
Right.
And that you have a contributing factor towards the wellness that comes from occupational endeavors.
Even the sense of, bigger than we are in terms of community and worldview and all of these kinds of things. And I think worldview is an important thing. It's sort of tied into an individual's belief systems. And different families have different belief systems, different individuals within families even. But I do think that people find comfort and connection at times with people who have similar worldviews or beliefs that are important to them.
Yep.
And I think that's really important that people find connection through that.
Right.
It can be very grounding.
Grounding and sort of a bit of a wake-up call, I mean, to all of us. When I'm thinking about this idea of the environment of our community, something that is so important to one person may not be that important to somebody else.
Yes.
And to that second person, something else may be more important.
Right.
Somebody throws litter on the ground, right? Okay, well, we can say that that's not being respectful towards the environment. But there's more to it than just throwing the paper cup on the ground.
Exactly.
There's the respect that people sort of attribute to walking across the parking lot and putting your empty coffee cup in the trash container.
Exactly.
Instead of throwing it on the ground. So
being a part of a solution versus a problem is a way of feeling good about oneself.
Yeah.
Right? And having a sense of pride in things. There's this broken window effect, psychologically speaking, where people, they studied in inner cities where, you could have a region that had a lot of litter, graffiti, whatever the case may be, and people would be more likely to drop a piece of something, a wrapper, whatever there, than on the lawn that's really manicured and tidy, right? And so it's sort of like if it's already trashed, or literally they recognize that broken windows led to more litter and trash. It's sort of like in a car, if you already have a bunch of stuff, it's what's one more thing.
Right.
But we can have that attitude, broken window effect, when it comes to relationships, when it comes to our workplace environment, when it comes to our community. And we have to stop ourselves and say, all right, this can lead down a path that's not great.
I'm going to stop you at this point.
Are we out of time already?
I know, you're shocked
Always.
every week.
Yes.
Every week. I want to thank the viewers for either watching us or listening to us today. If you're listening to our podcast, we are available on YouTube, on BCTV On Demand, and thank you, Diane Vaccarello, for coming in and spending this afternoon with me. And next week we'll be back, though I'm not going to tell our listeners and viewers what your choice is going to be.
Okay.
We'll be talking about one of the other 6 dimensions of wellness.
Excellent.
All right.
Sounds good. I'll look forward to that.
Excellent. Have a great week.
You too.
Okay.
Bye.
You gotta keep your head